If you think the most dangerous thing a fighter can do is throw a punch, you've never seen what happens when a man throws an insult in front of the wrong crowd. Punches land on flesh. Public humiliation lands somewhere deeper. It lands on pride, on status, on the ancient part of a man that still understands what it means to be challenged in front of witnesses. And on that night, in a packed arena full of fighters, coaches, promoters, gamblers, and men who had spent their lives learning how to recognize danger before it moved, one champion kickboxer made the mistake of trying to turn Mike Tyson into part of his show. The event had already been running for hours by the time the night turned. It was one of those hybrid fight spectacles people in the combat world loved, part tournament, part exhibition, part ego parade. The kind of night where every style wanted respect, every gym wanted attention, and every fighter believed the room should belong to him the moment his name was announced. The arena itself was not glamorous in the polished television sense. It was loud, hot, overlit, and honest. Folding chairs around the floor, bleachers rising in hard angles behind them, the air carrying sweat, cheap beer, old canvas, and that electrical pressure that only builds when hundreds of men in one building all understand violence in some form. By then, most of the crowd had already seen good action, fast knockouts, bloody noses, a spinning kick that sent one man through the ropes, a veteran boxer in the front row shaking his head after a sloppy decision, young fighters pacing the corridor with headphones on, pretending not to listen to the crowd reacting to everyone else. The night had rhythm, it had noise, it had the confidence of an event that believed it still had surprises left. Then people noticed Mike Tyson. He hadn't come in with fanfare, no spotlight, no announcer suddenly losing his voice trying to make the room erupt. Tyson was simply there, seated not too far from the floor, surrounded by a few men who knew better than to draw attention to him. He wasn't in training gear. He wasn't smiling for cameras. He wasn't trying to become part of the event. That, in a strange way, made him more noticeable. It made him feel like something heavy dropped into the room quietly. Men turned, recognized him, turned again to tell somebody else. The ripple spread the way it always does when a truly dangerous name enters a room full of men who understand what that name means. Some fans saw celebrity. The fighters saw something else. They saw history, damage, speed, reputation, and the memory of what Tyson looked like when he stopped pretending boxing was sport and turned it into punishment. Tyson sat with his body angled slightly forward, one elbow on the armrest, face unreadable. He looked like a man there to watch, nothing more. But anyone with instincts could feel the difference between a man who is relaxed and a man who is simply quiet. Then came the kickboxer. He entered like the room already belonged to him. Tall. Lean in that dangerous way some elite kickboxers are lean, every line of the body built for speed, balance, and public violence. Championship posture, controlled swagger, his robes, team colors, cornermen, the sound system, the timing of the lights, everything around him had been arranged to enlarge him, and he knew how to ride that enlargement. Some fighters enter an arena, others consume it. This one tried to consume it from the first second. He was already a name, a champion in his own world. The type of man who had spent enough nights under lights that he no longer separated confidence from identity. His style was made for crowd worship, long-range kicks, fast hands, clean finishes. A man who understood not only how to win, but how to make winning look theatrical. That mattered. Because fighters who know how to entertain often start believing they control all attention, even attention that doesn't belong to them. His name hit the speakers, and the arena answered. He raised one glove, then both, took in the reaction, walked the perimeter of the ring with the loose, arrogant smile of a man who had never learned to fear his own certainty. Then, somewhere along that walk, he spotted Tyson. The smile changed, not disappeared, sharpened. That was the first bad sign. One of his cornermen leaned toward him as if to keep him focused, But the kickboxer was already looking past his own fight, past his own event, at the bigger story sitting in the crowd. It happens all the time with fighters and famous people. A normal man sees a legend and feels smaller. A certain kind of champion sees a legend and immediately starts calculating how to use him. He climbed into the ring, still looking at Tyson. The announcer was speaking, but no one remembered the exact words later. They only remembered the energy shifting. The kickboxer bounced once, rolled his shoulders, then took the microphone from a staff member near the ropes. That was not scheduled. The arena loved it instantly. Crowds always love the illusion of spontaneity. They think they are being given something raw, something unscripted, something dangerous enough to become memory. The kickboxer knew this. He was good at feeling where attention was, good at grabbing it with both hands and making sure nobody looked anywhere else. He pointed the microphone at the crowd first, got a reaction, smiled, turned in a slow circle, let his own name echo back at him from different sides of the building. Then he lifted the mic again and said something about champions, about proving who the real fighters were, about men who didn't need marketing because they could do their talking with one round. The crowd liked that too. Then he looked directly at Tyson. And from that second on, every person in the building understood something was about to happen. Not a fight yet, not even a confrontation. Just that subtle inward turn of mass attention where thousands of separate people become one listening thing. The kickboxer grinned and said, "I see Mike Tyson in the building tonight." The crowd erupted immediately. Tyson did not move. That should have warned him. The kickboxer let the noise swell and then lowered his chin slightly, still smiling, the way men do when they're about to say something they think will make them unforgettable. "You know what?" he said. "One round is too much for you." The crowd made a strange sound then, not full laughter, not full shock. More like hundreds of people all trying to decide whether they had heard him correctly. The kickboxer spread his arms wider. Not done. That was the real problem. He wasn't just teasing. He wasn't tossing off a reckless line and letting it float. He was building it, stepping into it, making it clearer for the room. "One round," he repeated, nodding toward Tyson. "Too much for you." Now there were reactions from every section. Some men laughed because crowds laugh when they're not sure what else to do. Some stared straight at Tyson. Some turned to each other with the exact same expression. "This is getting stupid." Tyson still did not move, but men near him began to. One of the guys seated close to him leaned in a fraction, like he was listening for something Tyson might say under his breath. Another looked not at the ring, but at Tyson's hands. That's what experienced people do when a room starts going wrong. They stop watching faces and start watching hands, shoulders, distance. In the ring, the kickboxer mistook silence for permission. That is how these things usually go bad. He kept pacing, still gripping the microphone, still feeding off the crowd's reaction. "You got all that power, all that reputation," he said, now with open mockery in his voice, "but one real round with me? Too much." That was when the first trainer near ringside stopped smiling. Tyson tilted his head slightly, nothing more. But for the men who knew him, that tiny movement was heavier than a shout. The kickboxer was still grinning when he delivered the next line, and he had no idea the arena had already begun to turn against him. The kickboxer thought he had the room. That was the fatal misunderstanding. From where he stood, under the lights, with the microphone in his hand and his own confidence amplifying every word, it probably looked that way. There had been laughter, noise, movement, heads turning, people reacting exactly the way a public challenger wants them to react. In his mind, this was no longer a fight event. It was his stage now, and Mike Tyson, silent, seated, still outside the ropes, had become a prop in the performance. But rooms like that can betray a man in seconds. Crowds are never as simple as they sound. Noise can mean excitement, but it can also mean nerves. Laughter can mean support, but it can also mean discomfort. A room full of combat people does not react like a room full of ordinary fans. Fighters and trainers know the difference between good tension and bad tension. They know when something is still entertainment, and when entertainment has wandered into the territory of consequences. And slowly, almost invisibly, that arena was crossing the line. The kickboxer didn't see it because he was too busy hearing himself. He kept circling the ring, microphone in hand, shoulders loose, smile widening each time the crowd gave him anything at all. He pointed once more toward Tyson, this time more openly, more directly, like he wanted every camera angle, every witness, every fighter in the building to understand exactly what kind of challenge he was making. "Come on," he said. "Everybody acts like Mike Tyson is the most dangerous man in the room, maybe in boxing, maybe in highlight reels. But in a real round, with real kicking, one round is too much for you." This time fewer people laughed. That mattered. The laughter that did come sounded wrong, thin, uneasy, scattered. The kind of laughter people produce when they want to stay aligned with the energy of the room, even as they realize the room is becoming less comfortable by the second. Tyson was still seated, still expressionless, still doing absolutely nothing that would have looked dramatic to an outsider. But the men nearest him had gone fully alert now. One of them leaned in and said something too low for anyone else to hear. Tyson didn't answer. Another glanced toward the aisle as if already thinking ahead, already imagining movement, already wondering how quickly bodies could be placed between Tyson and the ring if things went bad. Because now the question was no longer whether the kickboxer had crossed a line. It was how much further he planned to go. The answer came immediately. He crouched near the ropes on Tyson's side of the ring, microphone dangling loosely in one hand, and looked down toward him with exaggerated amusement. "You hear me?" he said. "Or are you only tough when the rules protect you?" That landed differently. You could feel it. Somewhere behind Tyson, a man muttered, "Aw, no." In another section, two older trainers exchanged a quick look that said the same thing more clearly than words could have. This wasn't good business anymore. It wasn't fun. It was becoming an ego collision with too many witnesses and no safe ending. The kickboxer rose again, now clearly energized by the fact that Tyson still hadn't reacted. To some people, silence looks like maturity. To arrogant men, it often looks like weakness. He mistook Tyson's stillness for reluctance, and because he made that mistake in front of a crowd, he felt emboldened by it. He started talking faster. He talked about speed, about angles, about how some men became legends in one sport and assumed it carried over into all fighting. He talked about real range, about what would happen if Tyson had to deal with knees, kicks, and movement, instead of men standing still in front of him. He was no longer building a joke. He was building an argument. Worse, he was building it as if Tyson were not there to hear every word. That's how pride makes fools of champions. One of the event organizers stepped out from behind the barricade and looked up toward the ring apron, clearly thinking about intervening, clearly calculating how to do it without making the scene even bigger. But he hesitated. Men in his position always hesitate. Once a crowd smells disruption, even an attempt at control can become part of the spectacle. So he did nothing. And the kickboxer kept going. He planted himself in the center of the ring now, shoulders high, chin forward, crowd to his back, Tyson in front of him. He lifted the microphone one last time, and with the full confidence of a man who believed he had already won the exchange, he said, "You know what the truth is? A lot of fighters look dangerous sitting down. Let's see how dangerous Mike Tyson looks when he stands up." That line hit the arena like a thrown bottle, not because it was loud, because it was too direct. There are moments when a public room stops functioning as a room and becomes a witness. That was one of them. The air itself seemed to narrow. Men in the crowd shifted in their seats. A cornerman at ringside suddenly became fascinated by the tape on his own wrist because he no longer wanted his eyes visibly involved in what was about to happen. Tyson still had not moved, and now that stillness had become unbearable. The kickboxer leaned into it, smiling wider, Almost laughing at his own courage, he pointed again. That gesture changed everything. There is something about a finger pointed at another man in public that strips language away and turns the moment primitive. It is accusation, challenge, humiliation, invitation, all at once. And when the finger is aimed at a man like Mike Tyson, in front of people who know what Tyson is, the gesture becomes more dangerous than shouting. The arena felt it. So did the kickboxer, though not fully. There was a flicker in him now, a tiny uncertainty, not enough to stop, just enough to tell the truth his mouth was trying to outpace. Part of him had expected Tyson to laugh, or ignore him, or nod it off like a celebrity too smart to fall for a trap. He had not expected this terrible silence from the crowd, this sense that the arena itself was waiting for something other than words. Tyson's hand moved first, only to the armrest, but once it did, every pair of trained eyes in the building locked onto him. That is the thing about famous violence. People who understand it can recognize it at the smallest scale. They do not need the first punch. They do not need the rise of a voice. Sometimes the relocation of a hand is enough. The kickboxer saw it too late to take the line back. He was still holding the microphone when Tyson leaned forward slightly in his seat. And suddenly the whole arena knew this had stopped being a show. The kickboxer had wanted a moment. He got one, just not the kind he thought he was creating. For a long second nothing happened except that one shift in Tyson's body, forward at the hips, hand off the armrest, shoulders gathering themselves in the smallest possible way. But in that long second, the room transformed. The noise of the event, the chairs, the whispering, the movement, the distant calls from staff, collapsed into something thin and brittle, like sound itself, no longer wanted to be present for what might happen next. Tyson stood up. No announcement, no theatrics, no grin, no point to prove in words. He simply rose, and the arena died. That was the exact sensation of it. Not, it got quiet. Not, the crowd calmed down. It died. The sound left so completely that the scrape of Tyson's shoes against the floor seemed louder than the kickboxer's microphone had been seconds earlier. From the ring, the kickboxer's face changed immediately, only for a flash. But it changed. Until then, everything about him had been built on the assumption that Tyson would remain where he was, seated, still, at a remove, available as a target because he was not participating physically. The entire insult had depended on distance, not just physical distance, moral distance, celebrity distance, event distance. The safe distance people assume exists between a spectator and the center of the show. But the moment Tyson stood, all of that distance vanished. Now Tyson was not an audience member. He was a man, a very dangerous man. And every person in the arena could suddenly see, with almost painful clarity, how different those two things were. The kickboxer tried to hold the smile. That was his instinct. Fighters who live under lights know how to protect themselves with expression. If the room senses fear, it takes it personally. If the room smells weakness, it remembers. So he tried to keep the grin on his face, tried to turn Tyson's movement into the reaction he wanted, tried to act as though this total shift in the emotional weather of the building, had been his plan all along. But even from a distance, men could see it. The smile no longer reached his eyes. Tyson didn't rush. That made it infinitely worse. He stepped into the aisle with the same controlled heaviness that had once terrified entire arenas before the opening bell. No jerking motion, no angry pointing, nothing wild. Just deliberate forward movement from a man who had accepted the reality of the challenge and no longer needed anybody else to interpret it for him. A security man near the barricade froze. An organizer stood halfway up and then stopped, as if his body had committed to interfering before his judgment caught up, and reminded him who, exactly, was now moving. The kickboxer backed half a step inside the ring before he could stop himself. There it was, the first visible retreat, The crowd saw it too. That was the moment the balance of power reversed. A minute earlier, the kickboxer had owned the lights. He had the mic, the volume, the crowd's reaction, the momentum of the whole room gathered around his bravado. Now, none of that mattered. Now he was a man above ropes watching Tyson come forward with no microphone in his hand and no performance left in him. It is hard to describe how humiliating that shift feels unless you've seen it happen. Public confidence vanishes differently than private confidence. In private, a man can lie to himself. In public, every second of change is documented in the faces of witnesses. Tyson reached the edge of the floor and stopped just short of the ring. He looked up. The kickboxer looked down. And for the first time that night, they were in the same reality. No sound came from Tyson. That silence was more aggressive than anything the kickboxer had said. One of Tyson's men had come up behind him now, not grabbing him, not speaking loudly, just close enough to be there if needed. Another moved to the side. They were not bodyguards in the theatrical sense. They were experienced men with the instincts of people who understood escalation. They knew that the danger here was not only whether Tyson might step into the ring, it was whether the kickboxer, panicking under the sudden weight of what he had created, might say one more thing to force the moment past the point of recovery. And the kickboxer almost did. You could see the words trying to form in him: pride fighting survival, ego trying to drag him back toward the persona he'd been wearing only seconds earlier. He lifted the microphone again, but not as smoothly this time. Not with the same authority. His voice came out thinner. "You gonna—" He stopped. Because there is no easy sentence to finish when a man you were just publicly reducing has risen in front of you and erased the room's laughter with nothing but presence. Tyson still said nothing. He just held his gaze. That did more damage than an immediate outburst would have done. Anger can be negotiated. Men know how to deal with yelling. They can shout back, smile through it, use it, redirect it, invite it into something theatrical. But when a man like Tyson gives you no language at all, when he simply appears fully willing, fully present, and totally uninterested in making the moment easier for you, there is nowhere to hide. The kickboxer lowered the microphone an inch, another inch. The arena remained silent. Someone in the back coughed, and the sound felt obscene. Tyson took one step closer to the apron. That was enough. Now the kickboxer's whole body betrayed him, not dramatically. That's not how real fear often looks in trained men. It looked in the tightening of his shoulders, the change in where he placed his feet, the way he no longer seemed large under the lights despite still standing in the same body. He looked suddenly like what he really was, a fighter who had built his confidence in one context and had accidentally invited a different context to meet him face to face. And he understood it. You could see the understanding happen. He had not awakened a bit of crowd energy. He had not made a legend look small. He had not become the bigger name in the room. He had made Mike Tyson stand up. And now the room belonged to fear. The terrifying thing about the next few seconds was how little Tyson had to do. He didn't have to climb into the ring. He didn't have to shout. He didn't have to make a scene. Just by standing there and moving forward with that quiet, deliberate certainty, he had already stripped the kickboxer of the one thing all public performers require to survive: control of the atmosphere. And once that control was gone, everybody else in the building began to behave differently. The organizers moved first, not fast enough to look panicked, but fast enough to reveal that panic was already present. One man in a blazer hurried toward the ring apron with both palms out, talking to no one and everyone at once, trying to manage optics, trying to create a barrier, trying to remind the building that this was still an event and not the beginning of a disaster. Another staff member moved toward Tyson's side of the floor with the caution of someone approaching a dog he knows can tear through bone if startled wrong. Tyson ignored them all. His eyes remained on the kickboxer. That was what made the moment so unbearable. The arena was full of motion now, cornermen shifting, Security stepping forward, trainers half rising from their seats, audience members leaning into the aisles to get a better look. But Tyson moved through that motion like it didn't exist. He had reduced the world to one line of sight and one insult. Up in the ring, the kickboxer was trying to recover his image and failing in real time. He straightened his back, adjusted his gloves, lifted the mic once as though he still intended to say something clever, then lowered it again when no clever sentence came. Pride was still there, but it no longer knew how to perform itself. That's one of the cruelest things about public humiliation. It doesn't always destroy a man immediately. Sometimes it leaves him standing, fully conscious, while piece after piece of his confidence falls away in front of witnesses. Tyson placed one hand on the bottom rope. The arena made a sound then, not loud, but collective. A sharp intake of breath from hundreds of people who, despite all the movement around them, had been frozen in anticipation for the exact question now hanging in the air. Is he getting in? That was the line nobody wanted crossed. If Tyson entered the ring, the whole event died instantly. It would no longer matter what sanctions, rules, or main events had been planned. Everything afterward would be footnote. The night would become only this: the time a champion kickboxer tried to mock Mike Tyson in public and nearly found out, in the most direct way possible, what that mockery cost. One of Tyson's men stepped close at last and said something low. Tyson didn't look at him, but he paused. That pause gave everyone else permission to act more decisively. Security moved tighter. Two officials climbed onto the apron on the far side, not to confront the kickboxer, but to break the visual line between the men if necessary. The kickboxer's own corner had turned on him emotionally now. No one was feeding the performance anymore. No one was laughing. No one was encouraging him to keep talking. They were watching their champion the way men watch somebody who has just created a problem too large to solve with confidence. Then the kickboxer made the smartest decision of the night. He stopped pretending. That does not sound dramatic, but it saved him. He lowered the microphone completely and took one slow step back from the ropes. Not a theatrical retreat. Not enough to humiliate himself more than he already had. Just a step acknowledging the truth. A step saying, without words, "This is no longer my show." Tyson saw it. The whole arena saw it. And that step changed the emotional direction of the moment. Until then, the confrontation had been rushing toward impact. Now, just barely, it bent away from it. Not because Tyson had softened, not because anyone had somehow regained control, but because the kickboxer had finally done the one thing he should have done far earlier. He stopped feeding the fire. Tyson kept his hand on the rope for another second, then another. The arena waited. Nobody moved too much. Nobody trusted the shift completely. Men who know violence know that backing down does not always end it. Sometimes it makes the other man angrier. Sometimes humiliation sharpens danger instead of reducing it. But Tyson did not look angrier. He looked worse in a way that was harder to read, focused, breathing steadily, gaze still locked upward, fully aware that the challenge had been made, and publicly half withdrawn. One organizer near the ring said, very carefully, "Mike, not here." Those two words, "not here," said everything. Not don't, not calm down, not let it go, just not here. Because everybody there knew the awful truth. The issue was no longer whether Tyson would accept the challenge. He already had. The question was only where this might go if the room failed to contain it. Tyson looked at the kickboxer one last time. The kickboxer, to his credit, held that look for a second. Not with the earlier arrogance, with the strained dignity of a man trying to preserve at least one scrap of himself under lights that suddenly feel merciless. Then Tyson let go of the rope. It was such a small action, yet it moved through the building like relief after a held breath. He stepped back from the apron, and the kickboxer, standing in the ring where he had tried to become larger than Tyson through words, looked smaller than he had all night. No official fight happened. That was the part people said first when they told the story later. No punches thrown, no sanctioned round, no bell, no knockout. But those details missed the point. Because the real fight had already happened, and the kickboxer had lost it the moment Tyson stood up. That was the truth everyone in the arena carried away with them. Once Tyson stepped back from the ring, sound began to return to the building in strange, broken pieces. A chair scraping. A voice too loud in the wrong place. Someone near the back, laughing nervously, then stopping because the laughter had nowhere to land. The announcer looked as though he had forgotten his own job. One of the event staff reached carefully for the microphone still hanging uselessly in the kickboxer's hand. The kickboxer let him take it. That told its own story. Minutes earlier, he had wielded that microphone like a weapon. He had used it to enlarge himself, to bait the crowd, to turn Tyson into a prop in his own public act of dominance. Now he gave it up without resistance, because once a man has discovered that the room is no longer behind him, tools of performance become dead weight. Tyson remained on the floor for a moment longer, eyes still cold, body still coiled with enough leftover danger to keep everyone around him careful. Then he turned away from the ring without a word. That hurt the kickboxer more than if Tyson had shouted. A public insult wants public language in return. It wants a speech, a threat, a line the crowd can repeat, something that keeps both men in the same theatrical frame. Tyson refused him that. By saying nothing, by simply standing, moving, pausing, and then walking away, he denied the kickboxer the dignity of a completed performance. There was no banter to preserve, no mutual hype, no two champions, one tense moment, just one man who had spoken too much and another who had needed only presence to erase him. The walk back through the arena was almost as dramatic as Tyson's rise. People moved for him before he reached them, not dramatically, not like fans surging toward a celebrity, like bodies making room for a live current. A boxer near the aisle lowered his gaze as Tyson passed. An older trainer who had seen enough of the world to distrust bravado entirely watched him go with the exhausted expression of a man who had just seen a lesson repeated once again in front of a younger generation that had not been listening. In the ring, the kickboxer stood very still. His cornermen were around him now, saying things meant to repair him. Forget it. He wasn't going to do anything. You got him rattled, the usual emergency lies men tell each other when truth would be unbearable in public. But none of it landed. The kickboxer had eyes. He had ears. He had felt the building change. He knew the difference between provoking a reaction and summoning a threat. And everybody else knew he knew. That was the real punishment. Not that Tyson embarrassed him with violence, not that Tyson climbed into the ring and destroyed him, but that Tyson didn't have to. The humiliation was cleaner than that. The kickboxer had built himself up with words in front of hundreds of witnesses. Then, the second Tyson stood and accepted the reality of the moment, all that confidence collapsed under its own weight. He had wanted to look fearless. Instead, the arena watched fear arrive in him live, under lights, with nowhere to hide. One of the announcers finally found his script again and tried to push the event back toward its intended shape. He called the next scheduled item with forced energy, the way men do when they're trying to restore normalcy too quickly. But nothing felt normal anymore. The crowd was no longer at the event it had entered. It was at the aftershock of something else. Tyson left the arena not long after. No interview, no statement, no grin for the cameras outside, no effort to capitalize on the moment. That too made the story bigger. Men who need the crowd can't stop feeding it. Tyson had never been that kind of man. He understood something performers never fully do. Sometimes the most terrifying response is the one that ends before anyone can package it. He had stood up, changed the building, and left the kickboxer with the full weight of what he had done to himself. Later, the story spread the way these stories always spread, through gyms, locker rooms, calloused hands over drinks, old fighters talking to young ones who still believed volume and confidence were the same thing as power. Some versions exaggerated. Some claimed Tyson had almost entered the ring. Some said security barely stopped him. Some swore the kickboxer's face went white. Others insisted he tried to smile through it and only made himself look worse. But every version kept the same spine. A champion kickboxer, full of crowd energy and his own reflection, had shouted that one round was too much for Mike Tyson. Then Tyson stood up. And in that exact second, the room remembered something combat sports sometimes forget, beneath all their lights and microphones and social theater. There are fighters who love performance. There are fighters who understand spectacle. There are men who can make a crowd roar with confidence and noise. And then there are men whose presence turns noise into silence. Tyson was that second kind. The kickboxer never truly recovered the moment, because no clever explanation could rebuild what the arena had witnessed. Everyone there had seen the transition with their own eyes. They had seen him as he was before Tyson rose, playful, dominant, intoxicated with his own command of the building. And they had seen him as he was after, stiffer, quieter, smaller, under the same lights. That contrast became the story, not a fight, a revelation. A loud man discovered that public courage is easy when the threat stays seated, harder when it stands, harder still when it starts walking toward you and says absolutely nothing. That was the lesson of the night, and that is why people remembered it, not because Mike Tyson fought, but because he didn't have to.